Earlier today, we talked about choice boards, and I gave the people who were there a little bit of information about myself. Um, I am from Rapid City. Originally, I was born here. I left here. And then I lived in North Carolina and Florida for a long time, and then I came home. So in my travels, I became a middle school teacher. I taught 7th and 8th grade middle school for a long time, and then got my master's in instructional technology, and then decided to follow it up with my doctorate. And last year I was in the classroom, and I was in Rapid City. I was at East Middle School, and the math department became what they called a blended learning environment. And so I was like, yes, this is exactly what I want. I love this, and I'll be able to put all of my education into my classroom, and I'm so excited. And everything that I thought was going to happen happens in a different way than I thought it was going to happen in. But I loved it, and I love customization, and I love being able to customize learning. And blended learning, to me, is the best way that you can customize learning. I feel like you can reach so many students. And when I say blended, I'm going to talk more about that today, but I'm talking about both the use of technology and not technology in regards to teaching. So when I was coming up with what to do, I was like, oh, I would love to talk to teachers about how to blend like the teaching ninja that you are. Because you are all teaching ninjas, especially right now. You are doing things that most people would never even dream of. So I commend you. And this is really meant to be for you to be able to use now and when you go back into your classroom, because I'm sure that you are looking at things now going, yeah, I'd really like to use this in my classroom. I'm not sure how, but I'd love to use this in my classroom. And maybe there's something you don't want to use in your classroom, and you're like, I don't ever want to do that. And that's good too, because that way you know what you like and what you don't. So I've come up with 9 tips to blend learning like a teaching ninja. And this is to not only customize your lessons, but to increase student achievement, because that's a goal, and then motivation by creating that customized learning environment through blended learning. I put a quote on here, and the quote is by Caitlin Tucker, who is by far one of my favorite authors. And it says, teachers and instructional leadership are equipped with the skills to implement and sustain highly effective blended environments. Maybe you don't feel like you are. You can be. There are so many resources out there for you. You can be equipped with the skills to sustain a highly effective blended environment. And I want to give you the tips to be able to do that today. So we're going to start with tip number 1. Maybe. All right. So first tip, and I am speaking to you as a teacher, somebody who's gone through this. Everything that I put on here, not only did I research it and research base, but I want you to know that I've tried most of it. And there have been parts where I've cried through some of it. So I'm going to be super honest with you and tell you this is not easy. The things you're doing right now, you know they're not easy, and it's okay to admit to yourself that they're not easy. So the first thing that I recommend to you is research different methods of blended learning. There is no one size fits all, just like there's no one size fits all for your students. So research the different methods. Only you know your teaching style. You know your abilities, you know your students' abilities better than anybody else. Figure out what method or methods will work for you. You don't have to say, I am going to do this one method and only this one method, and my students are going to rotate in stations, the same station every day. You don't have to do that. You can take different methods and try them out. One good thing that I don't think that I did well, so reflected on, what are some possible pitfalls that you can prevent ahead of time? And if you are doing your research, a lot of the research will help you with that. So I have a book. This is one of my favorite books. It's by Caitlin Tucker, Tiffany Wyckoff, and Jason Green. And it's the picture right here. It's called Blended Learning in Action. This book right here, and I'm not paid by Caitlin Tucker by any means, but this changed the way I did a lot of things. This is a great place to start your research. There's other books that are great for this too. So Blended is a super book. It's by Horn and Staker, and it talks about disruptive innovation. When I first started East, they gave this to me. And then this is a green book, so it could come up weird. Yep, it's going to come up weird on the green screen, and that's okay because it's a green color. But it's called Powered Up Blended Learning, also by Caitlin Tucker. And then there's a book I have at work. That book is not here. It's called Bold School, and it's by Weston, and I cannot say his last name correctly, but Kieschnick. He is amazing. He's talked at several conferences. I've heard him talk Bold School. I'm going to talk a little bit about what he does too. I took things that worked for me and things that worked for my students, and I made my classroom into a blended learning, customized classroom by taking different methods from each one of those and then making it work for me. So please don't ever think that you have to do it the way somebody else does it. That's just not feasible, and only you know your students and yourself. So first thing, research. Second thing, build your technology toolbox. And I have helped to get that started today, I promise. And I'm going to show you in just a second. But before, and I know we're in a weird situation right now, and you guys are using technologies that you haven't used before, and you're using, your students are using technologies that they haven't used before, and you guys are doing great. But when you start to become a customized classroom, or when you start to blend learning, you really want to build your toolbox up before you go completely blended. That means you start with one or two new tools and get accustomed to them. Make sure that your students react well to them. Make sure that you understand them. So you want to start using new tech applications every once in a while with your students. Become familiar with them, introduce them, see what works and what doesn't. Maybe you absolutely hate one of them and your students don't react well to them. Don't use that one. So on here, and when this is all on my page, but this infographic is on my page. I have this box linked. It says, click this box for help starting a toolbox. So I'm going to actually click it, and it's going to take me to a toolbox that I have already started to create for you. It's going to take you to a Google Doc that I will continue to update. This is a published doc. I had to publish it so that I could have over 100 people look at it. But this is a hyperdoc without the tasks. I did not give you tasks. I think you have enough tasks right now. But everything on here you can start using for your toolbox. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. These are learning management systems. I also need to apologize because when you publish a Google Doc, all of the margins, they kind of mess up, and like the OCD in me stresses out about these things that are not lined up centered. I'm so sorry. Anyway, so you need to start with a learning management system. I will come back to those in a few minutes, but these are some typical ones that are used. In the elementary systems, Google Classroom is used a lot. It's very easy. Well, I say it's very easy. There's an easier learning curve. When you click on Google Classroom, so some of the links, I have trained teachers on these things. So I've linked things to my trainings and documents. So if I click on here, it actually goes to a workflow that will show you how to set up a Google Classroom. It will also do that for Seesaw and Canvas. And then with Edmodo and Blackboard and Schoology, I haven't personally trained anybody on those. So I used videos for that. And so I went and watched videos that are good, that are helpful for teachers, or I found cheat sheets online that I linked. So if you get a Google Doc that says tie, that was made by me because I've trained people in this. But if you get a video or a generic cheat sheet, that's because I haven't trained anybody in these. I've used Schoology and I've used Blackboard in my own education, so I'm very familiar with them, but I didn't have a cheat sheet per se. Like I said, Seesaw, super for elementary school. Tons of elementary school teachers are using this. I love it. I wish my kids' teachers were using this, to be honest with you. It's really, really good. And Edmodo is pretty easy to use. So I would think that that would be really good for elementary. Secondary. So I told you I was a math and science middle school teacher. As a middle school teacher, I used Canvas last year with my 7th graders. I love learning management systems. And like I said, I don't think you can do this without it. You've got to have a good way to manage yourself. But I'll come back to that. And I'm going to come back to this too. But let's talk about toolboxes. Right here, from Create a Digital Toolbox all the way down, I have tools with cheat sheets and videos to help you get started on things. So if you don't have a digital toolbox yet, start with a couple of these. Kahoot is a great one to start with. It's easy. Quizlet, super good to start with. Nearpod is really good. Padlet, I'm sure you've seen Padlets before, or if you haven't, check one out today. They're great. With videos, I've got all sorts of videos in here. The three kinds to be able to make your own video. You've got Loom, Screencast-O-Matic, Screencastify. All three do pretty much the same thing, just a little different. Edpuzzle, oh my gosh, you guys, if you are making videos, you gotta use Edpuzzle. Edpuzzle is amazing. WeVideo, I've just started playing with this one, but it's pretty fun. ViewPure, just found out about this from one of my grad students. ViewPure will help you embed your YouTube videos, and it takes away those ads and possible uncomfortable situations at the end of YouTube videos that sometimes pop up. So check out ViewPure. And then there's two videos here that are great for math and English teachers, Learn Zillion and Khan Academy. I encourage you guys to check these out on your own time. Flipgrid, really great. GimKit, also super fun, pretty new. This is definitely emerging. Any of these are great to start with. And if you just start with one, just start with one. It's okay. And then when you get comfortable and your students get comfortable, go to another one. This is more about what I talked about today with choice and customization. And then these are some adaptive softwares. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but adaptive softwares is kind of meeting your students where they're at and catching them up on some skills. And most of the time school districts pay for these. iReady, Freckle, MobyMax, right now they're free. So you could check them out and then you could pitch it to your district if it was something that you were interested in. But here is a great start. And guys, as I discover more technologies and become comfortable with them and make trainings on them, I will add them to this. So you will have access to this and I will just keep adding to our toolbox. This was just a start. This was the ones that I was like, oh, these are really good. GoFormative, I totally forgot to mention that one. GoFormative is a phenomenal one if you need a digital worksheet, and you can take it even further and embed videos, and it doesn't have to be multiple choice. It's so good. I will come back to this, but I wanted you to know that I have started a digital toolbox for you, just in case you need one. All right, keep on moving. So we've got to build that technology toolbox. I think that it would be so hard to do a blended learning classroom a customized classroom if you don't have some tools in your belt. Just like you've got to have tools in your belt to teach, you got to have technology tools. It's absolutely 100% necessary, and you've got to be comfortable with them. Wes, from the author of Bold School, one of his quotes from his book is, "Technology is awesome. Teachers are better." Totally agree, Wes. Blending new technologies in instruction is a non-negotiable if we are to help our students gain the skills they'll need to thrive in careers. And Jason Burke talked about some of that this morning, is where these kids are going to go into careers that we might not even know about yet. So we've got to really be good about integrating some new technologies and having them explore them and be comfortable with them. But while technology is awesome, teachers are better. And you guys are great for just being here and learning about new things. And look at what you're doing right now. Teachers right now, I mean, I think you're great anyway. Right now, you're like up 48 notches. Number 3, this is where we go back to the other document. A learning management system. So once you have some technology tools in your belt, you got to pick a learning management system. Even if your district doesn't have one, you need to pick one. If you are going to customize learning, if you are going to have your students working when you're not with them, you need a learning management system so that you can give out information and have it be there without you having to be there. Google Classroom. This is what I say. Google Classroom is a great beginner learner management system. It's awesome. It's what I started with. It's what I taught my first group of teachers with. I think tons, high school, middle school, if Google is your jam, then you want to use this to begin with. It's a great starter learning management system. You might eventually grow out of it a little bit. You might want more, which is what happened to me, and that's okay. But you can pick something first. If your district requires a learning management system, then obviously you're going to use that one. If your district does not require one, there are free versions of things like Canvas, Schoology, Blackboard. You can get the free version. And I can speak to that because I did not have a learning management system last year. So I used the free version of Canvas, and I signed all of my 7th graders up, and they came into class every day and they logged into Canvas. So please make sure that you pick some kind of learning management system so that your students have their work. It's great. You know why? Because when the kid misses a day, no problem. It's in your LMS. Everything that you need is in your LMS. So make sure you pick one. Make sure what you can and cannot use depending on your district. I don't want to tell you can use Canvas and then they say you can't. And then make sure you choose your age and content appropriately. Make sure you're using things that are easy for your students to use. Like I said before, when I was talking about learning management systems, these tend to be easier for the elementary school students to understand. These are going to be amped up a little bit, and my 7th graders had no problem using Canvas last year. And as 8th graders this year, they're required to use Canvas, and so is the rest of the school, and they use it with ease. It's not a problem. Once you've trained them, they can do it. They might tell their mom and dad they can't, but that's just a trick. My students were 100% good on Canvas. And so going into this, students who had me last year and then who were continuing to use Canvas this year, there wasn't a learning curve. Once they know, they know. All right, back to our tips. Connie, do we have any questions or anything right now?
Get off mute. Wondered where your toolbox was, and we put the resources back on. There was another one. No, I think maybe. Well, can you discuss blended and blend when you say blended and blended learning?
Sure, no problem. Thanks. So, and I'll kind of get more into this as we go, but blended can be considered lots of different things. Blended can be the use of technology applications and the use of traditional teaching methods. Blended could be station rotation. So I will get back into that in just a little bit, but you can have stations, and it'll be easier if I show you a picture, but sometimes you have a coaching station where the teacher is sitting and you have a small group of students. And then at another station, they're on a computer doing work that you've assigned through the learning management system. At another station, maybe they're reading, or they're doing some non-technology, or maybe they're working on a project, or maybe they're assessing. So there's different ways to go about that. And when I'm going to go back to that toolbox and talk a little bit more about that as soon as we talk about planning criteria. But there's so many different ways that you can do it. What I mean when I say blended is you're using traditional teaching methods and you're blending technology and maybe adding in some stations or whatever you want it to look like. There's so many different versions of blended that it's hard to define. You have to make it work for you. So when you establish your planning criteria, so this kind of goes into what we're just about to talk about. How do you want your classroom to look? Do you want it to be stations? Do you want to do where you teach a little bit first to your whole class and then you have them break off into different groups? There's just so many opportunities for you to be able to blend. And when I say blend, I really just mean using technologies and using traditional teaching methods, your learning. And when you blend it, you can also customize it. So to establish your planning criteria, you've got to look at your learning goals and your assessments. You do this thing called, and I'll talk about it more, but backwards planning. You got to look at the end in mind. What do you want them to know when you're done, and what are you going to assess them with? What resources are you going to use digitally? What curriculum resources are you going to use? What blended learning strategies will you use? So with the blended learning strategies, I'm going to answer more of your questions. There's a couple different things that you can do to blend learning. One of them is called station rotation, and I kind of talked a little bit about that before. So this is the blended learning models from the Blended Learning Universe website. If you are interested in anything having to do with stations, I highly recommend that you use this website as a resource. It's right on my infographic. If you click on the number, oh, I'm sorry, I lied. It's not on my infographic, it's on my toolbox. But when you click right here, it's gonna bring you up to the blended learning models. They have videos, they have models, they have everything. So when you're talking about station rotation, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think there's 7 or 8 different types of models. 7. This is one. So you have a small group at a teacher-led group, while another one is doing online instruction. So you're using your toolbox here. And then here you have some collaborative activities. So they could be using computers or they could be using non-tech. And then here, so they talk about having a floating teacher. So that doesn't always happen. It didn't happen in my classroom. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't always have a floating teacher. I did have a sped teacher sometimes, so we did use this. We used her, and she would actually run some stations. But I was pretty stuck here. And what happened is every 15, 20 minutes, we would rotate. So the kids who were here would go to online instruction. Then the kids who were here would go to collaborative. And then we would make that for the whole class. So however many minutes your class is. Now, I have to tell you, my class was only 40 minutes long. Well, 43. That's not very long. And my students struggled a lot with the time because they felt like they had too much work and not enough time. So I had to kind of figure that out. And then it came down to sometimes they needed think time. Like they needed time to flex. Like they needed to be able to do their work. They didn't want to get up and go. So I changed the way I did things where we did station rotation 3 or 4 days a week, and then I gave them a flex day so that they had time to, and it wasn't on a Friday always, sometimes it was in the middle of the week, but they had time to get work done that they needed to get done. And I'll kind of show you what I did personally as an example in just a second. I'll also tell you with 43 minutes, I did not have 3, I had 2 groups because my classes were pretty small. They were 20, 25. So I had 2 groups, and half my group I would do a teacher-led, and then the other half would work. And if you were in my group earlier, I showed you that triangle. They would work on that. If you weren't, watch the video. But that's how my students would work during the week. And so because they had all their work on Monday and they knew what was expected of them, they easily could go in there and they would just pull out the work that they needed to work on when they weren't with me. And I didn't need to be there because I had videos embedded in my learning management system. So if they needed help, there was a video there. I had a collaborative room, so they knew that they could talk to one another to get those things done. There's also all of these other types of models. There's the lab rotation, there's individual rotation. I don't have time to go into every single one of them. I'm sure some of you have heard about the flipped classroom. There's the flex, a la carte, enriched virtual. So this is a little bit like flipped, kind of different, but please go in and watch these. Use this part to research. This is the research part. This is where you can go in and figure out what works for you. This worked great for me, but I had to take out, or I had to combine these two, because 43 minutes broken into 3, that just wasn't enough time for kids to have think time. So I made it work for me. They still rotated and I still had smaller groups, but I had to make this work for me. And so when I talk about blended, I'm talking about using something like this and taking an online piece and integrating it. There's also a very flexible curriculum and flexible scheduling. So if you click on flexible curriculum and flexible, it's going to bring you to the TIE site. And we actually teach a course on flexible curriculum. And it will tell you more about this. I wish I had more time to go on. But it's very about customizing learning. It's a self-paced course. And you can make your curriculum flexible by looking at scheduling. I've seen schools. I work with a school. It's an amazing school where the teachers, it's an elementary school, and the first part of the day in the morning is math, and then they have recess, and then they have English. But then the kids who had English in the morning, they go to math, and the kids who had math in the morning go to English. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but they are also customized, and it's just an amazing, I wish I had a video of what goes on there. It's an amazing, amazing place. But if you are interested in a flexible curriculum, this is available through TIE. It's a self-paced course. You can get credit. And it will help you design a flexible curriculum unit. Lots of spiraling in there. Like I said, I did blended with stations, and I love it. I would never, if I have to walk back into a curriculum tomorrow or a classroom tomorrow, I will never go back. I will never go back to a traditional way of teaching. I will always do some kind of stations where I can have smaller groups and work with smaller kids and give kids choice and let them move forward at their own pace. All right, back to our tips. Connie, anything right now while I'm taking a breath?
Which schools do customized learning? Someone is asking.
So there are lots of schools that in South Dakota that do customized learning. There was a grant several years ago. There were, I believe, 19 schools got the customized learning grant. Not all of them look the same. Harrisburg Middle does a customized learning program that half of their middle school is customized, the other half is traditional. So like in 6th grade, the 6th graders have a customized track, and I just got to see this for the first time. It's amazing. Travis Lape is the person to contact if you'd like to know a little more about that. But then they also offer a traditional route, so they give both, which is pretty cool. East Middle School is a school I'm working with, and that's in Rapid City. They're working on customization in math, and they're going to start working on customization in English. There is Canyon Lake Elementary. I work with them. They're awesome. That was one of the schools I was talking about. Rapid City High School, also on the customized learning grant. Edgemont. There's so many. I couldn't name them all.
Sure.
But
and people are adding
those
in
are
the
some
comments.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Awesome.
And then and then here's another. I saw Brookings, Chamberlain, but they're adding in there, and it says, can you explain more about the SAMR planning graphic mentioned
Yes.
in your established planning criteria?
Absolutely. I totally forgot that one. Thank you
And
for
what
bringing
is
that
spiraling?
up. Spiraling. Oh, yes. Okay. Spiraling is when I teach something in September and then I never teach it again. So, and then they're tested on it in May. Well, if I spiral, that means I'm going to come back to it. Maybe I taught it in September. I'm going to come back to it in November, and maybe I'll come back to it again in February. So I'm spiraling my curriculum and making sure that stuff I hit in September, they're going to see it again before they see it on a test in May. That's spiraling. The SAMR graphic, totally forgot this one. I even put myself a note here saying click in this box for the SAMR planning graphic. So when I started out in instructional technology, I had a professor that had us do research on the SAMR model. And so when you're planning, I know you've all heard using technology for the sake of using technology. So SAMR helps you bring it to the next level to get the more bang for the buck. I'm going to quote Jason Berg all day, I think, because I liked what he said. So with SAMR, it stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. As you're starting to plan what you want your unit to look like, your blended learning unit, you're going to look and see your activities and say, okay, maybe I want to substitute a Prezi instead of a poster. So this is a direct substitution. There's no functional change. This goes with, if you're looking at blooms, it goes like with the Remember, it's the lower level of blooms. There's nothing here that is really different. Rather, I mean, a poster or a Prezi or an e-maze, any of these types of things. And that's fine, because when you're first starting out, you're going to sit in substitution, and that is okay. Then you go into augmentation. So you have something, you have a project, you have an assignment that you want them to do. Maybe you're going to take it up a level. You're going to start swimming where you might need a mask. So when you start using learning management systems, quizzes, Newsela, Quizlet, these are augmentation. So it acts as a direct tool, a substitute with functional improvement. So with like Quizlet, for instance, is flashcards. Back in the day, I had my little 3x5 cards. Well, now I can do it on my phone. So there is a functional improvement because I don't have to make my 3x5 cards anymore and lose them. Now you go into the modification. So you swim, you keep swimming. Now you're going into like where you need oxygen. So you can use different types of technologies to modify, and that's going to be where the tech allows for a significant task redesign. So you're going to have to take that task and kind of redesign it for your students. And then redefinition is the hardest place to get. You don't have to always be here, but it allows for the creation of a new type of task, something that they couldn't just do on paper and pencil. But I think the key to the SAMR model, and I know the key is you need to swim. And when you swim, you kind of got to go back and forth. So you're going to use things in your toolbox that are just substitution, but you're also going to want to go and get those redefinitions, especially if you use choice boards. You're going to want to use some of these redefinition tools because it's going to take your kids and it's going to expand their minds. So you don't want to just stay in substitution, and you can't just live in redefinition. You want to swim, and
Cari,
you want to go to the beach sometimes, and maybe want to take a walk. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think you can make that graphic a little bit bigger?
I can.
It's great.
Possibly.
It's just a little hard to read.
Sure. How about that, Connie? Is that better?
No, maybe. There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Everything good?
Yep.
Sure. Thank you. And I know I only have like 12 minutes. So, like I said, you don't want to live here. You don't want to live here. You also want to visit no tech too, because I think that's important. You need to give them options for some no technology. And you want to swim. And you want to come back up for air. And you want to swim. Even submarines got to come up sometime. So with this, you want to use these. Now, this is also linked within my resources, so you will be able to access this. And guys, you can just Google SAMR and it'll come up. That's where I found it. But this is my favorite one. There's all sorts of them. There's a coffee one that's really good too. But I really like this one because it also links to different technologies. All right. So we have established our planning criteria. Now we're going to go to what are your outcomes. Now this goes back to what standards are being taught, what skills do you want your students to develop. Jason Berg talked this morning about products. What do you want them to develop out of this? Do you just want them to know vocabulary words, or do you want them to be able to apply what they're knowing, what they've learned? What's your end goal? This an effective backwards design. I don't have a lot of time to get into this, but effective backwards design is literally starting from the end and working backwards. What are your outcomes? Now, I put a quote here, and this quote doesn't necessarily align to number 5, but it does align to where I'm going. It says students are quick to adopt to technology, but need to build a bridge which allows them to use it effectively in academic settings. Let me say this. If you've ever heard of the word digital native, there is a bit of a, trying to think of the word, misnomer about this. Kids are digital natives. That's a fact. Doesn't mean they know how to use it academically. Kids can use technology. My first grader can use an iPad all day long to watch videos and play reading games. That doesn't necessarily mean she knows how to use it in a classroom. The word digital native does not mean students know how to use technologies academically. We have to teach them that. And we can't assume that they do know. You can assume they know how to TikTok. You can assume they know how to Snapchat. You probably cannot assume that they know how to use technology in an academic setting. So because of that, which leads me to number 6, establish norms within your classroom. Your students need to know what's expected in your classroom. Are you implementing stations? If so, what do they need to do at the stations? Can they come talk to you while you're trying to teach your other students? What technologies are you using with them? Do they know how to use it? You've got to be able to teach them the things that they know how to use. You've got to give them norms. within your classroom. And your norms might be a little different than other people's, and you will want to collaborate with other teachers to make sure that your norms are as close to being the same, especially if you're using the same technologies, but your classroom could be a little bit different. Number 7, every teacher knows you've got to ensure rigor and relevance. Wes, I can't say his last name, old school author. Technologies give students more control of the pace, the when, and the how of the learning, so both its rigor and relevance can be elevated. If you can swim in the modification and the R, it just went out of my head. But if you can swim over in the M and the R sometimes, then you can ensure rigor and relevance. You will get there. Redefinition, I knew it was coming. Work to customize. So earlier today, I gave a session on choice boards. As you get more comfortable blending your learning, as you're using technologies and you are using your best practices that you have, the next step is to customize and incorporate student choice to increase learner agency. And that learner agency is students taking ownership of their own learning. So the first step to that is giving them some choice in it. Now, if you click on the work to customize, this will take you to that Wakelet. So I'll click on it, but it will take you to the Wakelet from my presentation earlier, which gives all sorts of choice board templates. But it's also, the Wakelet is also on my page. So please feel free just to grab that. I love this quote by Kathleen McClaskey. Personalized learning is not now what is done to the learner. I should say not, is not what is done to the learner or about tailoring the learning. It is helping each learner to identify and develop the skills they need to support and enhance their own learning. It doesn't mean that you're making it the same for every kid. You're giving them choice on how they're learning. And choice boards are a great first step for that. And finally, and I know I'm running out of time, Connie, embrace the struggle. Understand that no matter how much you plan for it, it is gonna be difficult. After 14 years in a classroom last year, I felt like a first-year teacher. I did, and there were tears. Because I knew exactly what it should look like on paper. I did the research, but it's okay. It's gonna be difficult. You will get through it, and so will your students. Things will not always turn out the way that you expect, and that's okay, because sometimes that is super for learning. Great things will happen too. What you think will happen probably won't, but that can be great. And give yourself some grace, and give your students some grace, because if you give yourself a little bit of grace, it'll be some grace, and it's hard. And this is just a new way to think for you and them. But I promise you it's worth it. Kids will fight it because they don't know any better. They know what they know. Once you get them into a process and they start understanding why they're learning like this and they have the choice, oh my gosh, it's just amazing. If I go back to my toolbox, down here, a couple tips for implementation. Again, just plan first, start small. You don't have to go from 0 to hero. Think about the things that you really liked during this time. Become familiar with the technology before you implement it. Expect failure. Learn from your mistakes. Don't throw everything apart when it falls apart. Did I say start small? I think you should start small. I put that a couple times. Collaborate, talk to your peers, talk to your colleagues, talk to your students. What did they like? Ask for help. Email me. I'm really good at this now. I can tell you. And give yourself grace. You are awesome. And it's hard, but it's so good. I would never go back, ever. And just remember that when something fails, it's just the first attempt in learning. And that's for us too.